bit explore, not more time. I am aware that I'm the only obstacle between you and well-deserved lunch, so I will try to keep it simple as possible. So the title of my talk is Neuroscience of Religious Experience between Subjectivity and Objectivity. Let me just run you briefly through the steps and plan of the lecture. So firstly, in introduction, I'm going to explain my motivation of today's topic. Then I will talk about experience, religious experience, neuroscience of religious experience, and then I will try to compare and see what are the differences or shortcomings between religious experience in concrete life and religious experiences in laboratory. The idea basically came from the notion that in all of these studies, we take for granted that we understand what is experience, and that we take for granted to understand what is religious experience. Although most of these papers do not try to define the concept of experience or religious experience, which is expected given the short form of the papers. But in my work, I try to a little bit elucidate these two concepts just to have a better perspective about what exactly are we talking about. So the book that motivated me, besides that, the fact that I'm a little bit involved in phenomenology, was the book The Blind Spot, that was written by 3 authors, and one of them is Ivan Thompson. You maybe heard of him. He's the student or pupil of Francisco Varela, who wrote Mind, Nature, and many other successful books. So their idea is basically to show how science is overlooking the concept of direct human experience, given that through its depth, through its analysis, through its theory and methods, it developed models that moves scientists and results away from direct experience of the world as such. In fact, it considers experience as something subjective, relatively hard to measure, and therefore with much less value than the, let's say, third-person perspective or objective knowledge. But basically, what they really, in a nice way, put it, science was originally based on direct experience, the temperature, the color, the touch, the light, and that. These are all real experiences. So my question was, how neuroscience, a discipline that is so much, as we heard today, also influencing human self-understanding, approaches religious experience, which is profoundly subjective experience. And this is also something that needs to be stressed. So in the first part of the paper, I'm talking a little bit about experience, history of understanding what is experience exactly. And just to be short, we can say that experience is a process of receiving different kinds of information on basis of which we form our ideas, our beliefs, and our knowledge about the world. But it is also, the experience is also a mental state that is a product of this process of gathering information. Therefore, we see that experience is an extremely broad term that encompasses the entire spectrum of information and processes. Phenomenology, on the other hand, pinpoints at least the type of phenomenology, the Scandinavian type of phenomenology that, like Zahavi, Soren Overgaard, and other authors like Gallagher also, that claim that every experience is deeply personal, meaning that every experience possesses this notion of minimal self, that selfhood is a structural part of consciousness, meaning that all experiences we have are always necessarily our experiences. In this way, the way it is the work of the self that interprets his experiences. And the process of interpretation takes place through the filter of previous experience and knowledge, like Hans was just saying a moment ago. So culture, religion, life decisions, expectations, and circumstances, they all influence the way we interpret our experience. And therefore, it also affects which experiences we classify as religious. And this is important because many of the contemporary authors in the field of neuroscience of religion will go by this line of thinking. Religious experience is an experience that is interpreted by a subject as such. So if the subject says it's a religious experience, we don't doubt it, but we take it as such. This means that the religion to which an individual belongs and whose beliefs he holds to be true can shape, first of all, what will be noticed in the first place, so perception. Also, the very object towards which the experience is directed is also influenced by religion and the subsequent interpretation of the experience. Furthermore, as Van Elk has successfully shown, empirical evidence points to the important role of cultural scaffolding and explicit teaching for endorsing supernatural beliefs. Now, we are already entering the field of religious experience. As you're well aware, William James gave this strong push towards scientific investigations of religion. He distinguished between beliefs and religious experiences. That is still referential in this literature. Jeden and Newberg, in their book 2 years ago, list 5 major elements that are studied in relation to religious spirituality: practices, rituals, affiliation, institutions, scriptures, experiences, and beliefs. Broadly, we can say there are 2 understandings of religious experiences: that it is a sui generis experience, meaning it has some unique characteristics that other experiences do not have, and the other one is attribution approach, meaning that there is nothing special in these experiences, but the subject is the one that gives them religious meaning through the process of interpretations. Of course, there are devised attempts to explain the origin of the experiences. Most of you are familiar here with Thales and her work on building block approach. So I won't go too deep on it, but I would like to mention that also the idea from McNamara, that surprise, meaning the unknown experience when it happens, that it can shock us profoundly, and this often leads to interpretation of experience as religious, which he really nicely elaborated in his last book. I'm sorry he's not today with us online, but tomorrow he will be. We heard today also a perspective about religious experiences from cognitive neuroscience, about addition and believing, so I won't go into that. I believe that Rüdiger and Hans made it better than I could elaboration of this. But when we talk about the types of religious experiences, then we distinguish, then we see that the concept originates from the Greek term pistis episteuein, that used to mean basically belief, but during the history of these concepts, it became only religious belief. So belief was somehow pushed to this narrower field of religious belief. Now, I was expecting when I entered the philosophy of religion that I will find clear definitions. What is religious experience? This is misspelled. It says religious belief, but I'm talking about religious experiences. And what I found was that most of philosophers of religion are talking basically about, let's call them extraordinary events in nature, like miracles, private visions, and events like that. And they usually use it to argument to prove God's existence. But the idea is here that, and I agree with Tore, that we need to also include ordinary religious experiences, because because the most of the believers have ordinary religious experiences, not extraordinary. Therefore, like praying the rosary, praying when you start your journey, or taking God who watches over you because you found a parking lot, these are all small religious experiences, but are included in the overall dynamics of a subject life, of a subject's understanding of his own religious sense. Another thing is that religious experience is basically a concept, a Western type of concept, that cannot be used in the same manner in different religious frameworks and cultural traditions. We are familiar with Christianity, but for instance in Hinduism or Buddhism, the object of experience is some basic fact of reality. Or in Confucian tradition, they don't even speak about the need to experience supernatural reality. They don't recognize religious experience as such, as a kind. Reports of different religious experiences indicate that there is a whole spectrum of terminology. So people usually speak about visions, auditions, a language of seeing, about everyday objects that have some special meaning to them, and so on. And now when we speak about neuroscience of religious experience, there are few studies that try to cover the whole field. According to my knowledge, this is the one of the latest ones that somehow identified 6 networks that are used for different sort of moments during religious experience. I will not mention them, you can read it later on slides, later on in the paper. The studies that I investigated for this paper, I divided them by the type of religious experience they study as such. So these are only part of the studies that I went through. So they either study prayer, or mystical religious experiences, or religious beliefs, or relationship between religions and religious experience, or there are attempts to initiate religious experience in subjects. Now, one of the main minuses for the whole field is that most of these studies study subject from the Christian tradition, and very often on small samples. So what I did, when I went through these studies, I took in each of those categories, I took a couple of studies, but I wasn't interested in the results of the study. I was interested in how the study was designed, how the scientists approach these subjects, how they choose the subject, how the subjects behave during the studies, meaning did they go directly to pray during the scan, or were they praying before the scan? How were they treated? How long did the prayer last? How was the input by the scientists gave, and so on. So these kind of data I was interested. I will not go through specific studies now because of the time, but most of them you have probably read. So there are a couple of issues that came to my mind when I was reading these studies, and when comparing the life circumstances versus laboratory circumstances of trying to initiate religious experiences. So first of all, is definitely to look after is the embodiment of religion. So today we do know that bodily posture determines and contributes to what takes place during religious experience, from emotions to thoughts. Now, during MR studies, most of them are MR studies, the body is in a lying position, which differs from most body positions during most common religious experience in everyday life. So you have the head that is firmly placed inside the frame, so it doesn't move during the recordings. You have protective elements, so you cannot move your body at all. Further on, bodily senses. So numerous bodily senses during the scan are exposed to certain, maybe unknown stress. So when you enter into religious experience, you try to achieve some kind of peacefulness and silence, but now you are entering the same experience but surrounded by 110 decibels of noise, which is, who went through this scanning knows what I'm talking about. The other thing is very important is space and time for religious experience. So there we have contrast between a space that is known to a subject, like monastery, church, its own home, versus unknown lab and MR tube that is narrow, that is claustrophobic. This is in a way incomparable. Now, in most of the studies, they do try to run mock scams or prepare people somehow to get used to this kind of spaces, but one try is maybe not enough. Also, there is the question of time. So usually there is a free choice or something that the believer is used to do when he's used to pray. Like, for instance, in Christianity, Sunday mornings before sleep, daily routine schedules of prayer and so on. But the time of the studies can vary very differently from that. Also, when you pray, if you are not in the right attitude, you can stop and go on and do some other things. But during the studies, you know that you somehow feel that you need to continue to pray, although you are not maybe in the mood to pray, because you have respect toward the study. You know that these are really expensive neuroimaging techniques and so on. And also the time frame of experience. So it came to me as a very interesting conclusion that, for instance, in one study, they chose subjects that claimed that they can achieve a direct relationship to the divine in a within 90-second block that is needed to make scans. So this is maybe this is also my bias talking from my perspective, but it's really hard because I don't know if you remember the study of Newberg, one of the first studies on nuns, that said, okay, God cannot be summoned at will, and they said we cannot summon God like when you tell us start praying or start having a mystical experience. So this is also something that is very important. Okay, we know that it's stressful, that it's proven that fMRI can have stressful issues, and some other issues that are skipped because of the time. So practice versus experience. This is a very tough question because when we are praying, I mean, we are having a religious experience, but many of our prayers are basically just very good practice. I mean, the experienced prayers became very skillful in their practice of praying. Also, we have spontaneous prayers. So spontaneous prayer is a prayer that I have some kind of trouble and then I start praying to God, help me please, that this conference goes well and the food is great. But what about when you are asked to pray spontaneously in an MR cube? Then this is not spontaneous, right? Then we have the start-stop problem. So this means that usually you have to compare the time of scans when you are doing some kind of task involving religious experience versus some kind of other mental task that is not religious. So pray now, okay, stop praying, now think about something else, okay, you can start praying, okay, stop praying, pray, and so on. So this is also a difficult problem. Privacy. We usually pray in privacy, and somehow people could relate that they are being recorded, and although they can also, there are studies where they pray in silence, but they still know, they may be thinking, okay, but my brain is being recorded, do they know what I'm talking about, and so on. Spillover effect, of course, very famous in scientific studies. Social desirability from psychological studies, that it's very hard to say if you are taken as a subject because you are experienced prayer, having done this for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, to say, I didn't achieve anything, I couldn't have a religious experience now. So, social desirability, overfitting sample size, that basically that because of the small samples that maybe we are catching more noise than what we really want to catch, and so on. Conclusion, subjectivity is really important for religious experiences because they are deeply personal and strongly influenced. And of course, there are difficulties to faithfully reproduce them in laboratory conditions, but this is not to say that we cannot do this kind of test. This is just to stress that the embodiment of religious experience is extremely important when we want to do this kind of studies. Of course, we need to use larger and more diverse samples. We need to be aware that religious experience is not a concept that is equal to everybody. Also, a recent paper that I just put my hands on by Philip Kellmeyer from Freiburg, Germany, explains basically You cannot only ask people during the studies, okay, did you feel the Spirit of God from 1 to 5? Okay, you need to ask more different kinds of questions just to understand how did people feel. And also a completely new issue can arise, because you can also ask people, okay, how is it to pray when you are so deeply immersed in technology? How is technology affecting the way you are experiencing your religiosity? This is also a different kind of topic. And I truly believe that these kind of interdisciplinary gatherings can help brush a little bit all of these problems. Thank you for your time.